Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 40, and my name is Janet Zabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We're going to jump right into today's guest interview because I didn't do much sewing last week. I was traveling. I went to Bend, Oregon for a denominational meeting, so I was gone for most of the week. Thankfully, the weather warmed up finally after the winter storm warning that Missoula had. Even where we were, even though we weren't under the winter storm warning, it felt like October out there, which is really strange. June is typically cool and rainy, but I can't remember ever getting snow this late in June. So we'll go ahead and jump right into the interview. My guest today is Kathleen McVeigh. Kathleen, or Kat as she likes to be called, has a book coming out with C&T Publishing on June 25th, which is the same day that this episode posts. And the book is called Reclaimed Quilts, Sew Modern Clothing and Accessories from Vintage Textiles. I follow C&T Publishing's blog because they put out some really excellent books, and I like to know what's coming. And when I saw that Kat had this book coming up, I contacted her and asked if she wanted to be a guest on the podcast. She was in the last couple of weeks of pregnancy, and so we arranged to do the podcast so that it would come out simultaneously with the release of her book. And that gave her some time to deliver her baby and get used to being a new mom. And you'll hear a little bit about how she's making that happen in the interview. I know that people have mixed feelings about repurposing vintage textiles. Some people believe that vintage textiles should be kept in their original form. Other people want to repurpose them into new articles of clothing or new accessories or other items. I am not here to pass judgment in one direction or the other. I think that there is a time and a place for everything, and I just want to offer an opportunity to explore the topic, think about the ethics of both sides, and have a little fun while we're at it. So, without further ado, here is my interview with Kathleen McVeigh. I am here with Kat McVeigh, who is the author of a forthcoming book from C&T Publishing entitled Reclaimed Quilts, Sew Modern Clothing and Accessories from Vintage Textiles. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out.
This is an exciting topic. When I saw that this book was coming out, I thought, oh, this is going to be a great interview because it touches on so many different aspects of quilting and textiles and history. So we're going to jump right in and talk about all of that.
Yeah,
I
that
like
sounds
to
good.
start by asking people how they learn to sew.
Yeah, so I learned to sew. I don't have like a specific, I learned to sew on this day at this time, but my grandmother sewed mostly by hand. She made quilts all the time. She would just have like a basket of triangles in her house, and I would go over there for sleepovers or to hang out, and she would give me the triangles and I would hand sew them together. And then later on she would like show me where they were in the quilt that she made, and I was like, oh, that's my triangle. So I started pretty young. I would say I was probably about like 5 or 6 when we did that, kindergarten or first grade. Yeah.
So you grew up having that around you all the time.
Yes, I saw my grandmother, my mom all the time. She lived like the next town over, and I would go there a lot, and she was literally always sewing. I mean, we have so many quilts. They're all triangles.
She liked triangles. That's interesting.
Yeah, and she had like a very unique way of putting them together. So when I learned to quilt, it was like relearning. She would like stuff each triangle with batting,
Oh my goodness.
sew the triangles together. And now I know like the traditional method of quilting. I'm like, wow, that was a lot of work.
Oh, that's interesting. So Then when you went to school, did you study textiles?
I did, but originally I went for sculpture. I was always the art class kid in high school, but I didn't really put sewing and my love of like art classes together until I took sculpture at Sarah Lawrence College, and I had this professor who was just showing us such a wide range of different kinds of sculpture, and she introduced us to fiber art and soft sculpture, and it was kind of like an epiphany for me. I was like, oh my gosh, sewing is art. And that's when I think I really like found my unique voice in making art. Before that, it was just a little bit of woodworking, a little bit of metalworking, doing the assignments, but kind of feeling like I'm still looking for my like passion project.
That must have been very freeing when you found that. And so what happened after that?
Yeah, I got really into soft sculpture and I was doing crazy installations. I was making quote unquote quilts, but they weren't really quilts. There was no batting, there was no backing or quilting. It was just, I guess they were more like tapestries, pictorial tapestries and abstract tapestries. And then when I graduated, your resources are limited. I didn't have a print shop and all these places, and I didn't have a huge gallery space to hang an installation, because the way I worked was that I would kind of build it in the space. Um, So I started quilting and learning about more traditional quilting, and I kind of just taught myself on YouTube. I mean, I had a heads up. I had a good background in it, but the actual, layering the pieces, doing the math, quilting, binding, I kind of taught that to myself.
YouTube is a wonderful resource.
It's so great. You can look up anything.
Absolutely. So, what sparked your interest in reclaiming vintage textiles?
Yeah, so it was actually I would say I had this idea. Now I know it's like a huge thing, but I didn't know it was a thing. I wanted to make a coat out of a quilt because I had this wrap blanket coat. I think it was from like Zara or something. It was handed to me by a friend, and it was coming apart. And I was like, I love this, and it's so soft. And I have this huge stack of quilts. Um, I should make a quilt coat. And then I kind of sat on the idea for a while. And when COVID hit, I had to go out of my studio space and into my tiny little apartment. So the way I made quilts, which was laying them all out on the floor, didn't really cut it. So I was like, now's the time for me to make my coat. And I made it, but then a friend wanted to buy it. So I sold it to them. And I was like, I'll make myself a coat. And I made it. And then someone else wanted to buy it and I sold it to them. And then a few people started reaching out locally asking me to make them a quilt coat. And I was like, oh, I have a business idea.
Did you have any previous garment sewing experience, or did you have to go to
Abs-
YouTube for that too?
yeah, absolutely none.
Okay.
And that's probably why, besides that, I just like the silhouette of the chore coat. I like the like boxy, oversized kind of like workwear look. It's a pretty simple garment to construct in the world of coats.
Yes.
I probably could have started easier, like with a tote bag or a tank top or something, but I really wanted to make the coat. So the first couple ones I made were I just cut up that coat that I had liked that was wearing out and used those pattern pieces. Um, and then kind of went from there. When I realized I was going to have a business and sell these coats, I was like, okay, I need to teach myself pattern making as well because I don't know what the etiquette is around buying patterns. And also I want it to be mine. I want it to be unique. And so that took a while.
I bet you built this all up from basically nothing.
I had a lot of time on my hands. I didn't
Yeah.
have to go to work for several months. And I remember saying, oh, I don't have to go to work anymore. And my mom said, oh, you're going to get so bored. And I was like, no, I don't think I am. And I definitely did not.
So you said you used that Zara coat for your pattern. Then
Mhm.
when people started approaching you to make coats for them, where were you getting the materials to make those coats?
I started, well, I quickly went through my stash of
Yes.
quilts. I used to live in Asheville and there was $1 a pound there, and I would just buy every quilt that I found there, like in any condition.
Wow.
And so then I decided, well, I have a business. I don't have much money. I'm going to put $400 into eBay and see what happens. And so I bought, I think, like, 4 or 5 quilts. And the money that I made from selling those quilts as coats, I bought more. And then I bought more. COVID kind of like calmed down, and I got to go to estate sales and antique shops and thrift stores. So, like, the pool I had to pick from got wider and wider.
My first question is, what are you using to sew these garments? Because quilts themselves are fairly thick, and then when you start sewing them together into
Yep.
garments, did you find that you had to upgrade your sewing machine or
Definitely. So in the beginning I was limited to the kinds of quilts that I could work with just because of the sewing machine that I had. A lot of times when you're buying at an auction online or on eBay, you don't know exactly how thick the quilt is or if it's got wool batting or a light poly batting. Um, so I had another stack growing of quilts that I just couldn't use. And I knew that I was going to get an industrial juki. I'm a juki girl, so I was saving up for that, and it's a heavy duty industrial juki, and it really changed the game for me. And it allowed me to work with thick wool, which I had never even tried. Yeah, and so now I mean, it has its limitations like all sewing machines, but I can pretty much do anything on it.
I have a Juki 1541. I'm a Juki girl too.
Yeah. Yeah, I started with the Juki TL 2010
Yeah,
quilting machine, and it was actually pretty good for quilting, like sewing through quilts. I've taught some classes where people bring their other machines, and I'm like, oh, my Juki actually was really good. Thank goodness I started with that. I might have abandoned the project altogether if I had had a lightweight singer or something like that.
right. Do you do binding on the insides of your for finishing or
I usually do serged seams.
okay,
Yeah, in the very beginning, I didn't even have a serger, and I didn't know how to serge. I don't even think I knew that one existed. I just knew that, like, when you buy clothes from a store, they have that like intricate woven thread on the edges. I didn't know if that was even accessible to me. So I lined all of my coats in the very beginning.
okay.
It was a lot of extra work, and it was also kind of upsetting when the quilt had a really nice back that I'd be like, oh my goodness, I'm covering this up. It
That's
would
a good
make
point,
the
yeah.
perfect inside. Um, and so my partner Dale bought me a serger for my birthday several years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Sometimes I'll go extra, like sometimes I will bind the seams or do French seams, but I'm constantly balancing like how much someone's willing to pay for something. And so while that is like a fun way to geek out as a designer and a sewist, I sometimes am like, well, I don't know if it's worth the added amount that I'd have to add for the several extra hours it takes.
Sure. So you're selling clothing, I know you have an online store, and we'll talk about that. Do you also sell locally?
Every once in a while, we'll usually do a couple pop-up markets in the summer. We're in a building called the Vaults here, and there's a lot of artists, and there's also a vintage clothing store downstairs, and she kind of sets up these Saturday pop-up parties. And they're really fun. It's so nice and easy because I just have to wheel my things downstairs out into the parking lot. And we'll do a couple Christmas, like, holiday markets. But they're not my favorite. It's a lot of work to do the retail yourself. And we live in a small community, so it's great to talk to people, but a lot of people already know we exist. They're just coming to say hi. They might buy something, but they probably would do so online anyway. But I think we do it for the community building and it's fun.
And you've branched out from just quilts. You do other types of reclaimed textiles?
Yeah, so one of the it was a kind of just learn as I go experience, experiment as I go. I was making all these coats, it was so fun, and then all of a sudden it was like 90 degrees. So I started digging into my stash of quilt tops and I was like, "Oh, I can make a dress, I can make a tank top, I can make some pants." And by that time like my pattern making skills were constantly evolving, so I started with the dress and the tank, and then I was like, "Oh, I need to figure out pants. I really want to do like a matching pant and top." I'm very big into like matching sets. I love them. Um, so yeah, it was kind of just like, how do we fill the need? So there's a need for summer clothing. We'll move on to lighter weight fabrics. Tablecloths are also great and amazing. And I had some embroidered ones that my mom collected. And so I went out searching for embroidered textiles, and I learned about the mid-century modern tablecloths that have the amazing fruits and flowers. They just make such nice, like visually interesting pieces.
I'm older than you, so I remember, back when fabric was a little bit more high quality than it is now.
Yes. I work with vintage fabric sometimes if I find it. I really like feed sacks. I know that was before your time, but
Way before,
in
I'm not
terms
that
of
old.
just in terms of vintage fabric. And, as a company that calls themselves sustainable, or that is sustainable, um, it's not just about the quality of the fabric. Like I will run across high quality fabrics, but then I need to investigate like where they're made, how they're made, what chemicals are used to make them, who's making them, how are they being paid, how are they being treated, how are they being shipped. It's a long tracing back to make sure I feel comfortable using the material.
Uh-huh.
And we have found a couple places that we do like, and so we do make clothing that's not one of a kind, that's not from vintage textiles, but it's from natural fibers, sustainably made textiles that are produced ethically.
While we're on the subject of ethics, have you gotten any pushback from people about using vintage textiles?
Oh my goodness. So much. There was that if you're a sewist or a crafter, I'm sure that you saw the YouTube video, um quilt coats must die. I don't know if you have, but it was made by a pretty well-known quilter. I forget her name, but it sparked this whole conversation about cutting up vintage textiles, and there was a lot of pushback. And then there was also a lot of pushback from upcyclers, and it was a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot, but I also learned that, like, yeah, I am ethically behind what I'm doing in the first, like, because I'm a lover of quilts in the first place. If I find an amazing quilt that's like pristine, or it's from the 1800s, or it has, just something like really, really special about it, and it can be used as a quilt, I don't cut it up. I seek out damaged quilts and quilts that are no longer serving their purpose. It's both an ethical issue and also just a financial issue. I don't want to cut up a pristine quilt. Also, a pristine quilt might cost $1,000. Whereas a beautiful, amazing quilt with like some cigarette burns and a couple stains is going to be way more affordable, which means the customer can purchase the coat at they're not cheap, but like at a more affordable price. So I kind of think about it in two ways. Like, how can I get these to customers? They're investment pieces, but I don't want to make $7,000 coats. And I also don't think a beautiful quilt that could be put on a bed should be made into a coat.
Just thinking about it in terms of me being a quilter, 50 years down the road, if somebody runs across a quilt that I made in a thrift store and a dog has slept on it or, whatever, I would be thrilled to have that quilt given new life
Yeah, I
as a
think so
piece of
too.
clothing.
I think so too. And also, as a quilter, we have a niche and we have like a very particular, not type of person, but like a limited number of people who are interested in quilts. And there are also a limited number of people who are interested in fashion, but those are different people. Like
Right.
there might be some crossover, but you're bringing this craft, this quilting craft, to a whole new audience who might not seek it out, who might not appreciate it. But when they see it in a different context, they do appreciate it. And I've had so many times that someone who's not a quilter, who's not a crafter, will buy a coat and it's, you know, signed by the maker. And they're like, where did you get this? When was it made? Who made it? And if they're stopped in the grocery store and they talk about their quilt, it's kind of like it lives on again,
Right.
as opposed to just being put away because it's damaged or thrown in a landfill. Or, the only time we use non-damaged quilts is if someone wants to give us a family quilt to be made into a coat, and that's their choice. And I think it's better, a lot of times they'll say, my great grandmother made this. It's been in my closet for like 25 years. And all of a sudden, it's at the grocery store, it's at the park, it's at a party.
You're being hugged by your grandmother.
You're being hugged by your grandmother, and you're also getting to show it off, and other people are getting to see the hard work she did.
So, talk a little bit, if you could, about you said your partner is also involved in the business. So
Yeah.
how do you structure that?
Yeah, he really wanted to be here, but we're you know, we've got baby duty off and
Yeah.
on. That's another full-time job that we just acquired. Um, so yeah, he is like a huge integral part of the business. It's funny because he was like, "You do the interview. I'm not the face of the business." And it's true. I'm the face of the business, I guess, but he does so much. Like we would not have a business without him. He kind of saw what I was doing, selling my quilt coats locally and like just like DMing friends and like accepting Venmo. And he was like, you have a business. This is a great idea. We need a website. We need to streamline your production. You need a bigger studio. You need better photographs. You need to tell stories and make collections. And so that's kind of all him. He does all the photography. He does the website. He does all of our branding. Like him organizing a photo shoot. It's nothing like I couldn't do that. I'm not a business person. I'm a maker.
It sounds like you've combined your superpowers very well.
We have. And before he quit his job, I would just joke that like when I get rich, I'll hire you. When I get rich, I'll hire you. Because his job was senior graphic designer in the marketing department of a large company.
Oh my goodness.
So I was like, oh my God, you have the skills. And he was unhappy at his job and he would always joke, like, yeah, you will hire me. And then one day we were just like, you know what? Let's do it.
Yeah, my husband and I are both self-employed. We own a construction company.
Oh, okay.
So he does all of the heavy lifting and I run the business part of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's nice when you can combine those talents.
Yes. And when you have totally different skills, I feel like you don't step on each other's toes as much.
Right.
We're not fighting over what this quilt should be turned into or what this photo shoot should be about. It's like I trust him completely to take what I've made and tell a story with it. And he trusts me to make those things. Although, as we are getting like deeper and deeper into the business and learning about what the other one does, it is fun to collaborate. Like we will collaborate on some designs and we will talk about the photo shoots or what the website looks like. But I think we still keep our defined roles.
So let's talk about the book.
Yeah, let's talk about the book.
Um, did you approach C&T or did they come to you? How did that happen?
They approached us. I was not thinking about writing a book. I, it was not even a thought in my mind. Besides that, people will ask us if we sell our patterns quite often, and my response is just no. But like in more in depth answer is like no, my patterns are drawn on like brown paper bags and manila folders and pieces of paper to like with pencils and markers, and some of my patterns are wrong with notes on them that just say like add 2 inches to the bottom and like cut an eighth of an inch off the like inside of the sleeve. And I don't even bother like perfecting the pattern because I just know. And the idea of like getting them onto a computer, Dale could do it, but we're both so busy. It just never crossed our minds. But it's flattering to be approached by a publishing company to say, we want to make a book. And I just said, yes. And Dale said, do you know what you're getting into? It's going to be a lot of work.
That was my next question. Did you know what you were getting into?
Absolutely not. I was just flattered. And you don't say no to an opportunity that, sounds exciting and will give you exposure and a chance to like expand your creativity. But no, I had no idea.
How long did the process take?
It took, I think, almost 2 years from the time they reached out. I'd have to see exactly what month they reached out, but it was a long time ago. And we're still working on the book in terms of like we're setting up a blog tour and we've got a couple more marketing videos to do. And it didn't end. Even when I thought it ended, even when I was like, the book is done, they were like, okay, now here's all of our like preparation for marketing. And I was like, oh, we have to make videos and like extra projects and do interviews and yeah,
And we should mention that you were also pregnant at the time.
yes. Dale and I like to joke about this particular video that I had to make at the end of March. I gave birth on April 3rd, and it's a marketing video for distributors to buy the book, and I am just huffing like I just sound so out of breath, and I can't wear any of the clothes that I've made
Right.
for the book. So I'm in just like a black dress and I'm like, oh, why am I in this black dress? Like talking about all these beautiful pieces of clothing that are bright and colorful and patterned, but I can't fit into anything non-stretchy. And I'm so tired. It was just, we laughed about it instead of getting frustrated.
Yeah. So the focus of the book is helping people to maybe develop their own vision for using vintage textiles.
Yeah, well, so we have a set, like we have 10 set projects that come with downloadable PDF patterns. So there's like a tank top and a dress. We do our chore coat and different coat. But I think that the book is more than just the patterns because there's so much that goes into working with vintage textiles. So as opposed to like buying a quilt and then buying a pattern for a coat, we're taking you through the process of like, well, what kind of quilt would be good for this pattern? Thickness, the size of the scale of the pattern on the quilt, the amount of damage, does it need binding? How are you gonna clean it if it needs to be cleaned? Depending on how old it is and how fragile and what material it's made from. What sewing machine are you going to use depending on the thickness? And so we go through like how to source the quilts if you don't have a quilt already or a textile already, like how you find them, what to look for, how to prepare them, how to clean them. We go through a couple of different ways to mend them because even though you can cut around damaged parts, sometimes the best part is damaged, or
Right.
sometimes it's just a little too damaged to fit your pattern pieces in. So we go over some mending techniques, and then we go deep into like how to make the final project look balanced, symmetrical if you want it to look symmetrical, because each quilt and each textile has a unique pattern. You can't just slap the pattern pieces on and get to cutting. A lot of patterns that you buy, they assume you're going to use a repeat pattern textile or a plain textile, and they're showing you how to get the most out of your fabric, like how to lay out the pieces for the least amount of yardage. Whereas we're going to, we talk about, you know, how do you create symmetry on the sleeves and balance on the sleeves? How do you take the best part of the quilt or like your most favorite part? Where is that gonna like really sing or like be seen and noticed the most? And it's not just about symmetry. A lot of quilts aren't symmetrical, but it's about like realizing before you cut what your garment is going to look like because you can only cut once. And there are probably 100 different ways that that coat could look depending on where you place the pieces. And that's the most exciting part of the process for me. And it's also, I think, the most difficult. Like, I'll see quilt coats sometimes and I'll be like, no, the pocket should have been the sleeve and it should have been, it could have looked so cool if the star had matched up with the buttons, or like, I'm obsessed with layout. So we get really deep into that in the book.
I envision myself just developing a terrible case of analysis paralysis.
I do. Yeah. People say, oh, how long does it take to make a quilt coat? And I'm like, well, how long do I stare at the quilt
Right?
and see 3 different coats and sit there trying to decide what is the final product going to be? I can't make 3.
So it sounds like in the book you have a variety of projects for different skill levels, and maybe not everybody's going to want to jump in and do a chore coat right off the bat.
That's true. And we do have like a tote, a stocking, and a clutch. I would say those are probably the most beginner. The clutch adds putting a zipper into a accessory and has lining. So even though it's the smallest project, it's probably not the first project. But like, once you make the stockings fairly easy, the tote has a few sewing techniques that you can learn, such as like bringing the corners together to create a bottom, so it's not just like 2 flat pieces. And then the clutch, you start to gather more skills, and then you go into clothing. And I would say, like, the tank top, is a simple tank top. You will learn how to create finished necklines and finished arms. But I will say that I tried to make the patterns as simple as possible without sacrificing look or fit. Like, we wouldn't just not do a pocket because it's easier, but I was like, what is the most straightforward way to show someone how to make the pocket that I want on the coat? And so I would say that if you're a confident beginner, you could do any of the projects, because we really walk you through it step by step.
Okay.
And there's a lot of photos that accompany each step.
Did Dale help with the photography, or?
He took every single photograph.
Wow.
Yes, there were thousands of them.
Wow.
We photographed every single step of every single project many times over. And we were working with one-of-a-kind materials. So when we were done, we would seam rip every stitch, get the pieces back to the beginning, start again. When I said I didn't know how much work it was going to be, I really didn't know. I was like, oh, you'll just photograph me while I make this coat. He was like, no, no, no.
It's almost like you had 2 babies.
Yes, it is. It is. I would say that, like, it seems like we've always had 2 full-time jobs since starting this business, and they get more and more difficult. So we started with, we were running Kitty Bad Hands and planning our wedding. Then the next year we were running Kitty Bad Hands and creating a book. Now we're running Kitty Bad Hands, selling a book, having a baby. We're really piling it on for ourselves.
Where did the name Kitty Bad Hands come from?
It was a happy mistake. Or not a mistake, but it was my Instagram handle. People called me Kitty Bad Hands in college just because I was, of my group of friends, like, I worked with my hands a lot. It would be like, oh, can you fix this shirt for me? Like, oh, the door broke, can you fix that? Like, I'm really good with my hands. So they called me Kitty Bad Hands as like a jokey nickname. And so it became my Instagram handle. Oh my God. Yeah, it was my Instagram handle when I created an Instagram before I created a business. And because I didn't really decide to create a business, I more just like was making things and sharing them with friends, and the business grew from there. I was sharing them on the Kitty Bad Hands account. And then when I discussed with Dale, like, I want to have a business, I want to start this business, could you do some logos for me. What should my business be called? And he was like, isn't it Kitty Bad Hands? And I was like, no, that's just my, and he was like, but everybody knows you as Kitty Bad Hands. You're going to have to start all over. I was like, oh, you're right.
You already had some brand recognition.
Exactly. So we just kept it.
So what's next?
Oh my goodness. Well, what's next is I'd like to teach some classes of projects from the book. I'm a very haptic learner, which is like hands-on. So I'm not a super visual learner or a super auditory learner. So I think other people might have the book, and I think we did a great job of explaining how to do the projects, but there's nothing like being in a room where you can ask questions and someone can show you how to do something and you can try it out. I think it would be fun to get together and make projects with people. But besides that, I mean, we're really just navigating how to run our business with a baby. So we didn't make any set plans for this year because we knew that we wouldn't be in charge.
Right.
And we're not in charge at all. Some days I get no work done. Some days I get a little work done. Dale and I share him between our two studios. Dale has his desk set up in the photography studio, and I have my desk set up in the workspace. So it's been interesting. But our hopes for this year are we have a whole bunch of this really special canvas that we got. I've been wanting to do workwear and color blocking with like a sturdy organic cotton canvas for a long time, but it's hard to find canvas that I feel comfortable using that is also going to be priced at a point where I can make something that's in our general price range. So I did finally find some, and I was like coveting it. And then they had a second sale where there's little imperfections in the canvas. And I bought a whole bunch of it. And I'm not going to have the imperfections in the garments, but I can just cut around them the way I do with quilts.
Sure.
So I'm really excited about that. And the other piece of that is that it's not going to be one of a kind. And we would really like to get manufactured. We finally did find a manufacturer that we feel comfortable with. They're called SoCo in Asheville, and they're a zero waste, sustainable manufacturing company. I haven't been able to design anything yet. I've got ideas, and we've spoken with the manufacturing company. And manufacturing is it's not cheap, and it's a lot of upfront cost. So we're not making things to order because you can't say, "Oh, will you make me one of these? Oh, I got another order. Will you make me one of these?" So we need to navigate that by either doing like a pre-order or getting some funding. And that just really makes me want to work harder on the design before we send it off. So I'm going to spend a lot of time designing those pieces. They're all designed in my head, but the construction of them, I need to figure that out.
Right. So I'm going to let our listeners know that your book again is from C&T Publishing, and it's called Reclaimed Quilts: Sew Modern Clothing and Accessories from Vintage Textiles. And what's the release date?
It's June 25th, so it's coming up.
Okay, and that should be the day that this podcast drops.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's awesome.
So that'll work out well. And how else can listeners find you if they want to order clothing, or do you still have your Instagram account?
I have my Instagram account. We don't sell. That's not true. We do sell through Instagram because we have our website linked up to Instagram, but it's not perfect. So I would say the best way is to go to our website, kittybadhands.com. There's just a lot more description there about what you're buying and the history and everything like that. And you can contact us. You can join our mailing list. We only send out a couple emails a month, so you're not getting in too deep, but you won't miss out on new products or announcements and things like that.
Great. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to get a copy of your book. I'm going to look for it when I'm out.
I'm
And
excited to get a copy of it too. I still don't have one.
and now I want to go look in some thrift stores for some mid-century modern tablecloths.
Yes, there are a ton of them there.
I think those would be fun to play with.
Yeah, for the summertime, they're perfect.
Well, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I do want to make sure that even though he wasn't part of the interview, Dale Donaldson, who is Kat McVeigh's partner, is the co-author of the book Reclaimed Quilts, and I want to make sure that he gets equal billing and acknowledgement for his contributions to their work. And again, just quick housekeeping notes. The podcast show notes can be found on the website at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. There is a guest forum there. There are show notes. There's an opportunity there for you to comment. I appreciate the feedback that I've been getting. You can also go to my website, which is at www.janetzabo.com. That has links to my knitting website at Big Sky Knitting, and also a link to my blog, which is where I talk about life in Montana. So if you want to hear about all the interesting things that are happening here in the northwest corner of the state, that's the place to check out. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and until the next episode, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.